Well, welcome back to Wall Street Silver for a special edition of the petrodollar. The petrodollar seems to be at risk, and I wanted to get some guests on to talk about it tonight. And luckily, I have Andy Schectman from Miles Franklin, Rob Kientz from Gold Silver Pros, and Lee Justo from Wall Street Silver. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Good to be here.
So let's start this off. You know, the petrodollar and how it all ties in with gold and silver. So the when we left the gold standard back in 1971, it's my understanding they wanted to have a reason for people to still keep using dollars globally, for a reason for the dollar to maintain its world reserve status. Andy, how's your understanding of that? What was the deal that was made back then?
Kissinger made a deal with the Saudi kingdom that we will protect you, we will provide military support and sell you arms in exchange for OPEC valuing oil globally in dollars. And, you know, it's at one moment we leave the gold standard and at the next moment we become the petrodollar. In both cases, we were the world or are the world reserve currency. And when you see news like this, where we're talking about Saudi Arabia striking deals with Russia for joint military cooperation, as we were discussing off air, what's the other side of the cooperation? Saudi gets military assistance and perhaps can buy arms from Russia. What does Russia get from Saudi Arabia? That's the $6 million question, where the article really didn't dig much into it. But look, the bottom line is what gives the dollar its world reserve status is the fact that everyone who buys oil, which is every country on the planet, has to first buy dollars. So this Rob, is a very big deal, very big.
Is that your understanding, Rob? Anything you want to add to the color of that?
Yeah, I think essentially this agreement is the Saudis kind of moving over to Russia, the BRIC nations, essentially moving their alliances over. The Saudis, I think, got pissed off at all the meddling that the U.S. government was doing in their politics and doing in the Middle East, and finally decided to create some agreements with other nations in the Middle East. And I think they've been doing this for a while. And then I think once they felt like they had cooperation in the Middle East, the Saudis took their oil, you know, over to Russia. And that's a huge geopolitical change, because we're talking about the petrodollar, right? So the petrodollar was for dollars to be used in an oil exchange around the world, which gave the dollar its strength. Everybody traded in dollars. Everybody needed to have dollars. It created a worldwide global demand for dollars. Now we have China, Russia dumping the dollar. We have the Saudis basically putting the middle finger up to that agreement that Andy talked about earlier. I think it was Kissinger, right, helped the U.S. negotiate. And now all of a sudden you've seen the script completely flip. And this is huge. Well, and it's not being talked about a lot in the mainstream media, but it's huge.
Yeah, right before we started recording, we were struggling to find articles about this subject.
Yeah, exactly.
If you hit Google News right now for petrodollar, there's like nothing. It's like you have to, and this is huge what's going on. So let's talk about this. Lee, jump in here if you got something. How does this affect this? How does this affect gold and silver prices, though? It's like there's sort of this whole petrodollar deal artificially maintains the value of the US dollar, which at the same time for decades has suppressed gold and silver prices. Is that
I think we should actually go back to the formation of this and why they did it. I mean, this was right after they closed the gold window, you know, because people were taking gold for dollars, because it was just a disaster.
So they wanted a reason for the world to still value the dollar as the world's reserve currency, even though we were no longer on the gold standard. And so that's why one of the reasons why the petrodollar was invented.
Yeah, absolutely. And if all of a sudden we wake up on a Sunday night, Monday morning, to find OPEC saying, listen, we're going to issue oil now in yuan, in ruble, in euro, heck, we're going to issue it in just about any currency. And when that happens, if that happens, this is a massive deal. All three pillars of wealth in this country, stocks, bonds, and real estate, are at all-time highs and inversely correlated to interest rates. It's interest rates that are manipulated more than gold and silver, which are manipulated because of Gibson's paradox, which speaks to the inverse relationship between real interest rates and gold. So they got to kill the canary in the mine shaft. But if we wake up to find oil now issued in several currencies, and it's one thing to go after Gaddafi in Libya, it's another thing to go after Saddam Hussein, but it's a whole different ball of wax to go after Russia. And one of the things that
or China.
But one of the things that I found interesting about this story, within a day or two of the story coming out, first it was Saudi Arabia, the next day it was Nigeria. They struck the same deal with Nigeria. In fact, the article is almost identical, the verbiage, the joint military cooperation. But one of the things that I noticed in Zero Hedge was an article talking about how the United States was 2 or 3 or 4 years behind Russia and China in hypersonic ICBMs. And Russia is now outfitting all of their naval battle cruisers or their battleships and their submarines with these hypersonic missiles. And they just wanted to throw that one out there too. So it's like, it's one thing to think that we can push the world around, make them accept the dollar or accept the fact that oil is denominated in dollars. It's a whole other thing if OPEC makes a decision and has military cooperation from the BRICS nations, namely Russia and China. And this is what I've been talking about for the last year and a half, this long linear progression of de-dollarization. And this would be the icing on the cake where everything would just go pear-shaped immediately, because half the world hates us. Half the world would love nothing more than to dump dollars and use different currencies to buy oil.
Well, so the next shoe that dropped in recently is, you know, we saw those 2 deals with Saudi Arabia and Nigeria now doing arms deals, and probably soon to be oil sales in other currencies. But we now see Russia and China just the other day, 2 or 3 days ago, announced that they're going to start doing jet fuel in yuan, and rubles, I think, is also buried in the story. It's just another, I think they're sort of testing the system as to how far they can push and whether the Biden administration reacts at all. And, you know, if Biden doesn't defend the dollar, I think you're just going to probably start seeing more and more little, you know, death by 1,000 cuts here. And then before you know it, the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, and all the implications that has for gold, silver, pretty much, it's my understanding about 25% of our living standard is funded by the dollar being the world reserve currency. Our ability to print dollars and the globe just taking them and giving us tangible assets in return. Mm-hmm. And that's at risk of dying here. Rob, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's moving. Obviously, what's happening in a lot of arenas is the Chinese yuan moving to the forefront as a competitor to the dollar. Mm-hmm. You talk about China or the IMF head office moving to China. You talk about China's involvement with the SDR. You talk about China and Russia bullying the BIS to force them to implement Basel III. And as a consequence, also gold in the system. You talk about Hugo Salinas Price saying that he had intel that China and Russia, Putin was going to basically tell the world that China and Russia were going to back their currencies with gold, which would immediately crash the dollar. I mean, it's obvious at this point that China is taking center stage, and it's obvious that Russia and China are working together, and China is issuing what's going to end up being trillions of dollars of loans to build the Belt and Road Initiative, which is going to connect 3/4 of the world's economies together. So China has taken center stage. The only thing left that China really needs to do is build their military, and they're getting pretty close.
Well, I'd like to follow up on something you just mentioned that also plays into this. The IMF $650 billion in SDR that was just approved, it cleared its final hurdle last month. I read somewhere, I can't remember where, that Russia and some of these other countries just got their SDR allocations, turned around and immediately spent them on gold.
Yes. So many people think, a lot of people have said the SDR is going to be the new world reserve currency. It could be. And the way that you could do that is you could add gold to it. which I think gold is actually now either a part of the SDR or they're considering it. And you can also weight the existing world currencies to control the SDR. So you don't actually, I mean, if you're Russia, and you're trading SDRs for gold, what you're saying is, we want the gold. We'll let China take center stage under the SDR as the dominant currency. I think that's what that means.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. I mean, that some of these countries would just immediately flip the SDR. I thought also the SDR, listening to Lynette Zhang or some of these others, the thought was the SDRs of the new world reserve currency or what they're planning it. But then some of these countries just completely blew it off and ignored it and bought gold.
Yeah, I mean, that's entirely
really interesting.
That's entirely possible. They could be. I mean, there's two theories here. Either the SDR's new world reserve currency, or China and gold are flipping the finger to the West and saying, we don't care, because we don't want. If you control the world currency, much like you did the dollar through the SDRs, you can control trade, and they're not comfortable with that. So it could be that they're saying, what, it could be a move in which to strong arm the IMF to say, look, we've got a lot more power here in the way that you run this. Maybe we'll accept the SDRs, but we're going to bully you around like we did the BIS. Mm-hmm. Or we're saying, we're going to place our currencies out front and force us into a corner.
Or they
force us to.
I mean, the SDR could be a combination of, all right, we have gold. Gold is taking sort of primacy in the opinions of China and Russia. It's gold first, right? Their
right.
top goal is to have plenty of gold reserves, and yeah, they'll do SDRs and other foreign currencies at the same time in their basket of reserves. Hell, they still own hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. Treasury bonds. But
China and Russia have slightly different approaches. It's something we need to talk about.
Okay.
China is a component of the SDR, the yuan. The Russian ruble is not. And I think what's also happening is Russia is hedging its bets with China, because if you think about it, China is the elephant. It's the 800-pound gorilla. China, I'm sorry, but China would squash Russia if they wanted to. I think China wants to use Russia to get their goals. But if you look at the way that they've run their empires in past history, they're not playing nice with Russia. So I think there's two levels going on here. I think China and Russia are working together where they can, but I think Russia is smart. Putin is smart. They know that the Communist Party there knows that China's just using them to get what they want. And as soon as China's done with Russia, they're going to get rid of them.
I mean, just getting back to the Middle East, I mean, the whole petrodollar system was based on our ability to help Saudi Arabia defend itself. And, that's
based upon confidence. It's based upon confidence that that the government, that the country is sound, that the military will do as they promised. That I think everything is coming into question. The way that we have created 50% of every dollar in the history of this country in the last 18 months, the fact that we turn and run and leave our allies in the lurch, including our own people, the fact that the mismanagement and the misallocation of resources and capital. And I think we have burnt many bridges. I think we've lost a lot of confidence. And that's really what the dollar is. It's based on confidence. And when you see the Chinese come out and say anyone who sails in the East or the South China Sea has to register their ships with us within days of the Afghanistan debacle, this is their way of flexing their muscles, saying, and I don't think there's any coincidence that they did it immediately after, because what are we going to do about it at this point? Are we going to jump right into another conflict? A lot of these things, the announcing of the unilateral or these joint military cooperation agreements within days of this happening, because I don't think it's a coincidence.
Yeah, I think I'll add two things to that. What you're seeing is what happened to the Roman Empire when they couldn't manage their empire. And by the way, this happens to every major empire throughout history, dating back almost 3,000 years. Sir John Glubb did research on this for the Crown and did about 27 years worth of historical research. The average empire lasts about 250 years. And at the end, one of the milestones was failure of foreign engagements, foreign colonies, foreign business interests. And that's what's happening in the United States. You're just simply seeing the end of the United States empire that we've seen for the last 100 years.
Isn't there an irony here? Going back to 1989, Russia pulls out of Afghanistan after their devastating experience there, and their empire pretty much collapses. I mean, Reagan famously said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall" in 1989. So there's some tremendous parallels here. It's just funny.
Well,
I think that was a strategic retreat by the communists, because I think both the Chinese communists and the Russian communists went into hibernation and said the West had beaten us economically. And so they established some Western economic systems, but integrated them with the Chinese state. I'll give you an example. The Chinese military basically crashed Nortel. Nortel was about the size of AT&T and Verizon together. And they hacked them and stole their product and went to the customers and sold it at a cheaper price. And that new company formed is now called Huawei. Huawei was Nortel's technology stolen by the Chinese. And what essentially happened is they used the military along with a capitalist methods that the West had perfected to build their economies. And now what you see happening is the communists coming out of the woodwork now. Communism never fell in Russia. It never fell in China. It went into hiding. It went under the guise of allowing their economies to grow and compete. And now the communists are coming back out into power in both of those countries. It was a fake fall of communism. It was staged fall of communism. It was a strategic retreat. But now you see them coming back. You see Russia coming back into Afghanistan. You see them coming back into Syria. You see China basically doing economic deals around the world. I mean, around the world, surrounding the United States. So I think it was simply a very smart move by the Communist Party for about 40 or so years to just retreat in the background, lick their wounds, allow their economies to regenerate, and then slowly, introduce themselves back into power.
Well, it's interesting how this all plays out. And something you mentioned about Rome no longer being able to afford their empire is sort of the way all this began. Here's the chart that I'm sure you've all seen, is the silver content of the denarius, the Roman silver coins, just gradually declines, and then essentially the final 40% just collapses. There's a lot of parallels there for the US dollar, the gold standard, and our own. America never had we never claimed to have an empire, but our military dominance was sort of unquestioned for decades, at least since the early 90s. Let's call it the past 3 decades. The sole superpower seems to be, rapidly coming to a close with recent events. Final thoughts, Andy?
Jimmy, I've been saying, to me, it's very clear this has been going on a lot longer than just this. The biggest money in the world has been moving away from dollars. They've been accumulating gold. And this is something that we've seen very clearly now for quite some time. And it's not just the central banks and the commercial banks. You're seeing the sovereign wealth funds and the family offices do it. And they're all positioning, because the biggest money in the world is always ahead of everybody else. And if you just take a step back and watch what they're doing, it's very, very obvious that the biggest money in the world is preparing for some sort of big seminal event. And this is as big of a seminal event as you would ever get if we move away from the dollar as a singular world reserve petrodollar status. It's just a whole new ball of wax in this country. And really, what the biggest problem with it all is that if interest rates rise, everything at the exact same time collapses. And that's what this type of event would do, is to spike interest rates beyond the Fed's ability to hold them down. And when everyone is buying dollars, it's one thing for them to hold down interest rates and buy the back end of the bond market. But when you see half the world start dumping dollars in favor of other currencies, that's when it's going to get very interesting very quickly.
Lee, final thoughts?
There's so much going on in the world right now, and unfortunately, it's really hard to find information on key events like this. So you really have to do your diligence and look around and try and follow, like Andy said, what the big money's doing. And obviously China and Russia have been accumulating precious metals significantly over the past few years. So you're kind of crazy if you don't.
And I wonder what the billionaire Davos crowd, I bet you they are also. Rob, you have the final word.
Yeah, everybody's accumulating precious metals because gold's going to become front and center in the monetary system. Silver were too, but silver's industrial and they need silver for the space race. And that is the next big frontier. The alignment taking place is into the next age. It's not the information age, it's the space age. We're there. Nokia's building a 5G network on the moon. That's on their website. You have satellites going up like crazy. That's the next frontier. This realignment is a preface to that age. And if the way to protect yourself is hold precious metals, pay down your debt, and be safe.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate you joining me to talk about the petrodollar, decline of the petrodollar, and how gold to the moon, right? That's what it all means at the end, right?
Yeah, I saw this trend years ago, and it's about to come to fruition. So everybody go get your gold and silver while you can.
Yeah, I mean, hard assets. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to play this. There's more options than just gold and silver, but obviously that's what we on this channel, that's our favorite hard asset of choice. So no surprise we say buy silver and gold. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good to see you guys.